The way we take care of ourselves is ever evolving.
And what we know for sure is that our mind and spirit are linked to our physical body.
And that our wellness seems to extend into our communities and the planet we all share.
It is very, very clear that wellness is interconnected.
We love spending time with you to explore and practice the breakthroughs, the insights, and the passions of incredible people helping us all see the world in a whole new light.
This is Health Gig.
Today we're excited to have Chip Conley on Health Gig. Chip is the founder of the Modern Elder Academy. He's a New York Times best-selling author of a book called Learning to Love Midlife. Chip, welcome to Health Gig.
Welcome, Chip. We're so happy you're here.
So glad to be here as well.
Well, thanks. And we want to start, Chip, by asking you a little bit about yourself, where you're from, and how you got into the hospitality industry and then moved into what you're doing now.
Well, it's an honor to be here with sisters-in-law
Yes.
and the outlaws and the in-laws and all that. I grew up in Southern California. I went up to Northern California for college and graduate school, lived in D.C. and in New York for short times, had a roommate from Maine. We thought you'd appreciate that, Doro. He was from Ellsworth, actually. Long story short is I started a boutique hotel company a couple years after Stanford Business School in my mid-20s, and that was in the mid-1980s, and I ran that company for 24 years. It was called Joie de Vivre, means joy of life in French. Very fascinated by hospitality and wellness, and that was for 27 years now, I've owned the largest spa in San Francisco. I was on the board of the Esalen Institute, which is one of the famous personal growth retreat centers. In my late 40s, I really struggled, and you know about that based upon reading my book. I struggled on many levels. It felt like my life was crumbling, and I sort of felt like I was getting the game of life wrong. And as a man, I was sort of, I'm pretty good at talking about my emotions, but when I felt like I was really getting screwed up during that time, like I was somehow doing everything wrong, I was having a hard time talking about it. And unfortunately, I had 5 male friends during that time and during the Great Recession go through hard times as well, and all 5 of them took their lives. And
Yeah,
so
we couldn't believe that.
that's a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a lot.
So I got to the other side. I had an NDE, a near-death experience that led me to waking up and having the hoteliers wake up call and say, like, I can't do this anymore. I don't want to be. I need to, have a relationship end. I need to figure out how to get my foster son, who's African American, out of prison. He was wrongfully there. I need to sell my business and lick my wounds at the bottom of the Great Recession. And I didn't want to be CEO of that company anymore after growing it from 1 hotel to 52 hotels and 3,500 employees. And so I got to the other side of it, but I noted to myself, like, wow, 45 to 50 is a rough period. And then I had a midlife atrium in my early 50s, what is basically means I had space to reimagine what was next for myself. And at 52, I was asked by the founders of Airbnb to join them when it was a tiny little company 12 years ago to help Airbnb become the most valuable hospitality company in the world. So I did that for 7.5 years, 4 years full-time and 3.5 years part-time. And I ended up writing a book about it called Wisdom at Work, The Making of a Modern Elder. And while I was writing that book, I was in Baja, where I had a home on the beach, where I am right now. And I had this Baja aha, an epiphany. And the epiphany was, God, I could have used a school, a midlife wisdom school, a place where you come to transition in midlife, whether you're going through menopause or empty nest, or as unfortunately you had to deal with, Tricia, a spouse passing away or your parents passing away, a medical condition. I have stage 3 cancer. So where do you go in the middle of your life for that? And so I decided to create the Modern Elder Academy, and I called it Modern Elder, which is not the best name in the world because people think it's for people in their 90s. Although we did have a woman last week with Richard Rohr, the famous Catholic priest.
Wow, Richard Rohr, yeah.
He was teaching with me last week. We had a 91-year-old there, and she was 91 going on 50. I mean, I could not believe she was 91. The average age of people who come to MEA is 54, so it's not elderly at all. The term modern elder came from my time at Airbnb when the founders said, Chip, you are our modern elder. You're as curious as you are wise. And I was like, oh, I love that. The perfect alchemy of curiosity and wisdom. That's how the name came about. We have 2 campuses, one in Baja, one in Santa Fe, and we've had 5,500 alumni go through the program from 50 countries, and we have 60 regional chapters around the world.
Wow.
Wow. What does regional chapters mean?
So regional chapters are where alumni in a particular area, like Washington, D.C., where you are, Tricia, or, there's not a main chapter, but there's a Northeastern Yankee chapter of alumni come together once a month or, sometimes once a quarter to do an event. It could be like do good work in the community. It could be having one of our guest faculty members come in and give a talk. It could just be a social event. It could be someone's birthday party. But with that many alumni around the world, we have a lot of people out there. And there's sort of a common ethos. There's a way of thinking that is really sort of deeply baked into our curriculum, which is how do you help people reframe their relationship with aging and navigate transitions, cultivate purpose, and learn how to own their wisdom. And what Becca Levy at Yale has shown is that when you shift your mindset on aging from a negative to a positive, you gain 7.5 years of additional life.
That is incredible.
That's amazing.
Like you said in the book, that's even more than what you get if you stop smoking.
That's exactly right.
And that's amazing.
That is amazing.
Wow.
But most people don't know about it, though, Tricia. I mean, that's what part of the reason I wanted to create MEA was to be a living laboratory for people to understand that this mindset shift on aging is really important. And that's part of the reason I wrote the book, because we have a lot of anti-aging messages out there. What about the pro-aging messages? The subtitle of the book says it all, 12 Reasons Why Life Gets Better with Age.
Right.
And there's some things that we know don't get better with age, and Hallmark cards will remind us of that. I'm gonna do a class action lawsuit against Hallmark cards.
Yeah.
Starting at age 40, they start to remind you of all these things.
Old age. Wait, can we revert back up for 1 second? Because you said a lot. Can you tell us about your near-death experience?
So I broke my ankle and had a bacterial infection in my leg. So I had a septic leg. So I was put on a strong antibiotic. It wasn't working that well. So they put me on a stronger antibiotic. And I should have just been hanging out at home. Instead, I was on the road for a book I wrote called Peak, How Great Companies Get Their Mojo from Maslow. And I gave a speech. And at the end of the speech, I was sitting and signing books and I went unconscious. And so for the next 90 minutes, 9 different times, I basically went flatline. There were paramedics there at some point, so they had to paddle me back to life with the electric
Oh
paddle.
my gosh.
What I was seeing when I was on the other side was just this beauty and awe, and I was like a bird in a Swiss Alps chateau or, chalet on the second floor with light coming in through the skylight. And I was flying around like a little bird with other little birds. There was this viscous frangipani scented oil going across the dark wood floor and starting to drip down the stairs. And so everything was moving very slowly and it was so beautiful. And the message I got from it was just to slow down. And so part of the way I was going to slow down was to actually sell my company. And I have to admit that I need to have that memory more often.
Yeah.
I tend to not slow down very easily. My recent cancer journey has been another opportunity for me to remind myself to slow down.
Yeah. And how are you feeling and where are you on that and how's it all going?
It was 6 years ago I found out I had prostate cancer, which is a relatively slower form of cancer. And although it's the second most likely cancer that a man will die from in the United States. And then it went to stage 2 and then it went to stage 3. So I've just had to sort of become more vigilant about it. I had my prostate taken out. I had a prostate surgery before that. I had prostate taken out, 36 sessions of radiation, a year and a half of hormone depletion therapy. So I have only 1 to 2% of my normal testosterone. It's not been easy, but the question I asked myself is, cancer, what do you have to teach me? Rather than sort of seeing myself at war with cancer, which, early days, I definitely saw myself that way. I'm supposed to learn something from this. I'm in cancer school and I hope to graduate and move beyond cancer school. But I don't know if I will. Moving from stage 1 to stage 2 to stage 3 is a bad sign. We've done a lot of things in the last year and a half for me. So right now my cancer, they're suppressing the cancer with my testosterone being so low. I may get to undetectable and then they'll take me off the hormone depletion therapy and then we'll see what happens. So I'm living my life. As Tricia, with your husband, if you don't mind me saying, one of the things that Laura Carstensen at Stanford Center on Longevity has shown is that the shorter lifespan we have ahead of us, the less we focus on the future or the past, the more we focus on the present. And being in the present moment is a gift, interesting present gift. And there's a sense that, when you can be in the moment and really appreciate everything that you're experiencing in this very moment, you lose track of time. Time becomes less important. Does that make sense, Tricia?
Totally makes sense. It's so true. And the truth is, too, Chip, nobody knows how much time we've got. We really just don't. But when you're facing it, it kind of does keep you back in the present moment. And as I said, in our experience, Dora, right, with Danny, his last 2 years would be arguably one of his best years. He was in the present moment and felt love like he had never felt it before. And things looked so alive to him, which was part of that healing journey that we were talking about before. It doesn't mean you're still here, but it was certainly a healing journey.
You mentioned your son. We had Mark Howard on our podcast who runs the Frederick Douglass Project. He teaches prisons and justice at Georgetown. His life's work is to help people who are wrongly accused. Where are you with your son and how is that going?
So his name's Damien, and starting at age 13 for him and 28 for me, I became his foster father. He was my mentee, like I was tutoring. Actually, he was not mentee, but I was tutoring him. My first hotel was in the inner city of San Francisco. So, I wanted to help and give back to, kids in the neighborhood. And so we stayed close. I mean, he was my foster son, and so stayed close. And he ended up having 3 kids in his 20s, and he was working well and never had a record or anything like that. And then on a New Year's Eve one night, long story short is he was falsely accused of something, a law that had just been passed, meaning a law that on midnight that year went into case, and he actually at 1 o'clock in the morning on New Year's Eve was accused of this law. And so the jury instructions on the law were faulty and problematic. And when he went to a jury trial, 2 of the jurors were attorneys who said these jury instructions don't make sense. And the judge said, well, these are the instructions. So he was found guilty of something that he was wrongly accused and convicted of. And ultimately, a federal judge let him out 8 months later. But quite frankly, the process was just awful. He was in San Quentin for 8 months. So for the first year after getting out, he was okay, but he was having PTSD and a lot of stuff. And then he went off the rails and started trying to kill himself and kill other people and, was trying to kill me. So I haven't talked with him in 5 or 6 years now. So it's hard. And that's why, I have 2 biological sons who are with me this week, who are 12 and 9, and having them in my life is helpful because number one is I can give back to them. As biological kids, their history. And in Damien's case, at age 13, I came into his life and his mother was a prostitute, his dad was a drug dealer. And, I inherited a kid who had trouble. He did so well despite that trouble. That's why the karmic consequences of him having this situation happen in his early 30s was just tragic. So that's that. As one of my friends said, no good deed goes unpunished. And in some ways, that's what it felt like for a while with Damien, because he's also a borderline personality disorder. So if you know what that is, it means that the person comes after those that love them the most. So yeah, that taught me a lot.
You have been through a lot of schools for sure. No wonder why you're like the founder. Exactly. Whoa. Whoa. Yeah.
Our painful life lessons are the raw material for our future wisdom. So when we're going through a really difficult time, what we can try to understand, as Viktor Frankl did in his book, Man's Search for Meaning, about being in a concentration camp in World War II, if you can try to believe that wisdom is the residue of pain, and when you're going through a painful time, on the other side of it, you're going to be wiser. You're going to have a sense of purpose and meaning that may be even more beautiful. You don't intend to have pain. There's lots of ways to get wisdom without pain, but pain is maybe the greatest teacher.
Yeah. And, I think, and you talk a lot about it with transitions, and that's the whole purpose of this book and all that you talk about. And what Dora and I were talking about is this idea that we're thinking that change can be easy and change isn't. Change is like you're growing, right? And growing is hard. It's a different feeling. It's a different place to be. So can we say, do you think, that pain is growth or no?
So you could say, are you going through it or are you growing through it? And the key is to figure out, how do you find the bridge between those two? To be quite honest, when you're in the worst of those times, it's often, you just have to be patient and say, like, I will get to the growing
Go
piece of it,
later. Yeah.
Mhm.
because
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
going piece is all I'm trying to get through right now. As Winston Churchill said long ago, when you're going through hell, just keep going. There's something about learning to go through the hard parts and then realize that once you've gone through the hard parts, there's some growing that's going to happen. And there's post-traumatic stress. There's also post-traumatic growth. And that is actually in social science been proven. I can't tell you, why does someone have the stress versus the growth? I actually think it's not binary. You can have both. That's a key thing to know. And we have a lot of people who come to MEA who are in the midst of their messy middle, the very challenging time of their life. Something's ended, but the new thing hasn't begun, and they're sort of in between. And those are the three stages that any transition is: the ending of something, the messy middle, and the beginning of something new. And part of our job is to help them to both have the tools to understand, how do you go through the messy middle, but also how to have the hope and growth and the sense of meaning of what you're going to learn in the process.
So when you come, what does it look like? So is it a week-long program? You're in school like from 9 to 5, or how's
Yeah. No, it's a lot more fun than that. It is 5 days long. It's usually a Monday evening till a Friday evening or Saturday morning. It's at these two campuses, one in Baja on the beach and one at 2,600 acre regenerative horse ranch just outside of Santa Fe, New Mexico. The program is sometimes in the classroom, sometimes out in nature. There's lots of fun stuff we do: dancing and bread making and surfing, all kinds of things that help people to not just like use their brain to solve the stuff, but actually use their body and their intuition and their heart. And I think one of the most important things we need to learn in midlife defined broadly as 35 to 75, the idea of how to become a beginner again. Because that's one of the
Yes.
challenges we have as we get older, is we stop trying new things because we don't want to look stupid like being a beginner. And curiosity and an openness to new experiences are two of the most important variables of living a longer, healthier, happier life.
It's so interesting, and you talk about the book, and you just said midlife is 35 to 75. So it's been expanded.
Yeah, so it used to be, like, I would say 30, 40 years ago, it was 40 to 60. But why is it now 35 to 75? Well, for some people in their mid 30s, they're going through the kinds of career and life transitions that people were going through, later. Like the career transition wise, the AI revolution and all of the digital changes we have going on have people sometimes feeling obsolescent in their mid 30s, which is really unfortunate. We're living longer. So if you're living till your 90s or 100, midlife may last till 75. You may work till you're 75 by choice or necessity. I like to think of it this way. Again, another bridge analogy or metaphor. There's early adulthood that might last till 30 or 35. And then there's later adulthood, which actually starts maybe at 75 if you're going to live a long life. So early adulthood, later adulthood, and then there's midlife, middle adulthood, your middle ages. And the middle ages last a long time. So the more longevity we have in our culture, the longer that bridge.
What you're doing with the alumni, and as you talk about this, you're like rebranding, rethinking, reframing the way that we're all talking about what aging is. That's the whole thing, right?
That's the whole thing. And it's partly because of, if we actually can gain life and happiness by shifting our mindset on aging, why are we not doing more of that? We have lots of public service announcements, PSAs for stopping smoking and starting exercising. Where are the PSAs for looking at life and the unexpected pleasures of more life? And that's why the 12 chapters in the book really focus on the kinds of things that social science and our MEA alums have taught me get better with life. Everything from your emotional intelligence and your lack of reactivity improves with age. You value social relationships more as you get older. You have more wisdom and crystallized intelligence, which is a form of intelligence that really speaks to the idea of connecting the dots. We get better at understanding ourselves as we get older. We get better at editing. The first half of our life is about accumulating. The second half of our life is about editing. We learn to define success in our own way and therefore get off the treadmill or stop climbing the ladder that's propped up against the wrong building. We become more spiritually curious, We get less attached to our ego. Finally, we learn how to grow whole, not just grow old, which means we are both an introvert and an extrovert, someone who has curiosity and wisdom, someone who has gravitas, depth, as well as humor and humility, lightness and, levity. This woman who was just in one of our workshops who was 91, my God, was she present? When the time required her to be sober and say something that was just deep, she would say it. And when the time came for her to actually break up the room with some laughter, she knew how to do that. And we get better at that as we age. We have the capacity to get better at that. There are definitely lots of cranky old people who do not get better at any of this. They get bored and they get cynical and critical and conspiratorial.
Oh gosh,
And
okay.
there's a lot of people who fit that profile. There's also the capacity as we get older to have the qualities that I've just described.
Tricia and I thought it would be fun if we could sort of go through and pick out a few things to talk about.
Sure. Perfect.
And we've underlined the book.
We love the way you laid it out.
Yeah.
The first 2 chapters, the physical life, then the emotional life. So yeah, Dora, you want to lead us? We're so excited.
Well, let's talk about I have more life left than I thought. And what are some of the factors that you talk about in there? We love talking about age fluidity. Thought that was really interesting and important. But what do you want to highlight?
The average age of the person who comes to MEA is 54, and the average age they think they're going to live till is 90. And most of us do not think of 54 as being halfway through adulthood. 54 is exactly halfway between 18 and 90. When someone says like, oh my God, I have as much adulthood ahead of me as I do behind me, that's a surprise to them in their mid-50s. And therefore, helping people to see that is really important. Helping them to see that they can be age fluid. And to be age fluid means you're not defined by your chronological age or your generation. You're all the ages you've ever been or will ever be. So long story short is this first one really speaks to the idea that we have more life ahead of us than we think we do.
I'm relieved my body no longer defines me. So can we talk about that? Because I said to Doro, there is a process to get to that.
For sure. This is one that chapter was written more for women than for men.
Yes,
Now,
yes.
Men have their own issues around their body. In fact, men can sort of really fall apart. They, first of all, get a belly. Men are more likely to have the classic pot belly than women for a variety of reasons. It's about visceral fat and this other kind of fat that I can't remember the name of right now. But women have often been defined by their bodies and by their looks and their beauty. And the whole anti-aging industry is really an anti-women industry, let's be honest.
Yes.
It's about making women feel badly about their natural process of aging. And I wanted to have a pro-aging message here, and I wanted to help women see that there are many playing fields you can be playing on in life. And for most of our first half of life, we've been playing on the playing field of the body, what it looks like, our beauty, etc. And we try to enhance that because we get social standing by doing that. And there's a point in life where it doesn't mean you give up on that. It just means you don't get obsessive about it. And you don't focus so much on the short-term vanity, but you focus more on the long-term maintenance of our body. Think of our body as like a rental car we were issued at birth. The key is to make sure that it's maintained well, but the bottom line is you care more about what it feels like on the inside as you get older than what it looks like on the outside. And so how do we help people, but especially women, recognize that natural beauty as you age, if you own it, if, happiness is, as Joni Mitchell said, happiness is the ultimate cosmetic. If you can own it and show that radiance from within, people don't notice your wrinkles, they notice your energy.
Tricia and I are natural agers, we like to say. Natural agers are far and few between these days. Most of our friends are not, and that's fine too. We've had to hold the flag for the natural agers.
But I will say, I had to go off Instagram. I'm off Instagram, but I have a drawer full of anti-aging things. I got them all. I got the Theragun thing. I got those things for around your eyes. I got it all, but it's a process. So that's the physical life and the way you've broken this out. So that makes sense. And now we're moving into the emotional life.
There are 3 under this category.
Yes.
The first one is about your emotional intelligence getting better with age, and that's pretty irrefutable. It doesn't mean everybody's that way. I mean, a cranky 80-year-old uncle may not be that way, but the bottom line is that we learn how to moderate our emotions a little bit better and dance with them more. And we're just smarter about our emotions. So that one's easy. The second one's about the social relationships.
Yeah.
The number one variable for living a longer, healthier, happier life, according to Harvard study, according to Blue Zones, according to Phil Pizzo at Stanford Medical School, is how invested are we in our social relationships in midlife and beyond. That is a really important thing for people to know, because friendship is a practice. Just like any practice, you get better at it if you work at it. Women are good at this, men less so. And so helping men to see that maybe their friendship muscle has atrophied a bit in their 20s, 30s, and 40s when they were so focused on their work and maybe being a parent or a husband or whatever. They've got to work at this. That means maybe being vulnerable as well.
Men, when their friendship muscle is atrophied, put a lot of pressure on, if they're married, their spouse, or if they're not married, their boyfriend or girlfriend. I just have seen that it's really especially hard for men to be alone, and then they put pressure on the people that are around them, and that's hard.
I can't tell you how many MEA folks, women have come and said, like, I do not want my husband to retire.
Exactly.
Because I'd seen my friends, they hate having their husband at home because women have more roles in their life. They're caretakers, they're PTA presidents. They frankly gain their confidence in their career in their 50s and they want to keep it going. And so there's this weird thing that happens where men sort of give up on life and just want to golf and watch TV and maybe drink alcohol at home. Then the wives are like, oh my God, I have to leave the home to have sanity. And that's why gray divorce, which is people getting divorced after age 50, is the fastest growing form of divorce in the US by far. And 70% of those divorces are being initiated by women.
What do you think about that word retire?
I hate it.
I know. I know. Doro and I hate that word.
Technically, the word means to go off into seclusion and withdraw. That's frankly what a retirement community often is. And I think people want to be, engaged. And it's not about being youthful anymore. It's about being useful. How can we be useful? And playing bingo and playing golf isn't always the most useful way of living your life.
So, Doro, you want to ask? We couldn't wait. One of us wanted to say it. So, Doro, you want to do the next one?
Oh, sorry. You want me to say it because it's a bad word. I have no more left to count.
Yeah, we're talking about the fact that as we get older, it's not that we don't care about things, we do. We don't care as much what other people think about us. The people who we do care about, we care deeply about. We care about what they think about us. But we don't care about everybody and what they think about us. And we cannot save the world, but we can save our little community garden around the corner. And so it's just getting more discerning about the things that matter to us.
Is this a people pleasing when you went into people pleasing?
Yes.
Can we talk a little bit more about that?
Oh my God. Well, for many of us, including myself, the way we got currency in life and in social situations was to actually be really good at making people like you. And I'll never forget when I was in high school, my friend Jeannie, she said to me, I don't like you. And I was a people pleaser. I said, well, why don't you like me? And she says, because everybody else does. And she was sort of a rebel and an artist. And so she didn't want to be like everybody else. It's like, well, there's nothing I can do about that, is there? She said no. And, of course, I should have taken it to heart and said, like, that is something I need to remember the rest of my life. Clearly, I've remembered it the rest of my life, but it didn't mean I changed in my teens, 20s, 30s, and 40s about wanting to have everybody like me. Today, this is not about shouting at people and not liking anybody or not caring about anybody. No, that's not what we're talking about here. We're just saying, how do you get more discerning about what does matter?
And you also talk about judgment and judging in the mirror, and judging ourselves really is judging others means we're really judging ourselves.
Oh, for sure.
So now the mental life, then you move into that and the marveling at my wisdom. And you talk about wisdom, it's shared, it's not taught, or what, how did you say it? Or what did you say about wisdom?
Yeah, wisdom is not taught, it's shared. And wisdom is really important. I mean, we live in the era of artificial intelligence where all the world's knowledge has been commodified. So what is really valuable is wisdom. And wisdom is often hard won. You learn your wisdom along the way and based upon life experience. And the more life you have, the more raw material you have for wisdom. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean you're wiser as you get older, because if you haven't done anything with that raw material, then it is not going to have much value to you. And there's a thing called crystallized intelligence. Fluid intelligence is being fast and focused in the brain, and you tend to focus on one part of the brain, either left or right. The other kind of intelligence is called crystallized intelligence, and it's like four-wheel drive of the brain. And as we get older, we get better at that. We can go from left to right brain much more adeptly, and we connect the dots and think it systemically and intuitively more readily. So again, I wanted to sort of bring things to the forefront so people say like, hey, that's something that gets better with age.
So when you were with Airbnb and you were brought in, were you feeling really wise?
No, I mean, when they first said to me a month into it, they said, we hired you for knowledge, but what you brought was your wisdom. And I was like, I don't even know if I have wisdom. I know what knowledge was. Wisdom is creativity, it's intuition, it's ethics, it's leadership, it's things that I hadn't really valued. Often we don't value our wisdom because, quite frankly, it feels like common knowledge. But common knowledge is not always common. I learned that wisdom was very valuable.
And you can develop it.
You definitely can develop it.
And is that when you started the Wisdom Journals, or you did that in your
Yeah, I
original
started that
company?
way before
Way
that.
back at the original company. Can you talk a little bit about that? That really caught doors of my attention, these Wisdom Journals.
When I was 28 and I was 2 years into being CEO of this little boutique hotel company that grew into a big company, I felt clueless, and I just felt like I don't know what the hell I'm doing. And so I, one day on a Friday afternoon, came home and I took off the shelf a journal that I'd never written in, and I wrote my wisdom book on the cover of it. I actually have it right here. You can't see, everybody else can't see, but it says my wisdom book right there. My wisdom
Oh,
book.
wow.
Wow.
January 1990, I started a process of every weekend looking at what I had learned in the week, key lessons, often which were painful. I would, say, how will this serve me in the future? So what's the lesson? How will it serve me? And write 4, 5, 6 different bullet points. And the process of doing that every weekend now for 35 years has been miraculous, because what it's done is it's helped me to cultivate and harvest my wisdom along the way.
So talk about our stories and how they can serve us.
When you're a quarter of the way through a novel, you don't necessarily know all the characters or the plot themes and all that. But when you're halfway through, you sort of know what's going on. And that's true in your own life. You can start to see your own patterns, your shadows, like, oh my God, I'm doing the same thing over again. Like, in fact, pattern recognition of yourself is a form of wisdom. And you can only have pattern recognition when you have enough patterns. And as you get older, you can sort of see your patterns. And so understanding your story just means like, wow, you have self-awareness and reflection, maybe modify your behavior as a result of that. So it's a really important piece of getting older. Again, as is true with most of these, it's not for everybody because not everybody does this, but it is a benefit that you have available to you.
And that's when you talk about the hero's journey, right? In that chapter.
That chapter is the most complicated chapter. I
Mm-hmm.
like the chapter a lot because that chapter could be its own book. But
Yeah.
I talk about the hero's journey because, frankly, the purpose of the hero's journey is not to just slay dragons. It's to actually learn something along the way.
And then the next one is I've learned how to edit my life.
The first half of life is about accumulating. The second half of life is about editing. And for a lot of people in their late 40s, they feel like the accumulation of so much, all of the responsibilities, all of the relationships, all of the jobs they've had and the kids they now have and the stuff they have at home and the obligations, and there's just too much. And it's around that time in our midlife where we have to start to say like, okay, what's less important? Or what's a mindset that I need to let go of? Or what's a grudge that isn't serving me? And one of the things we do at MEA is we do something called the Great Midlife Edit. And it's a way for people to let go of the things that aren't serving them anymore.
Now we move into the vocational life, which, Doro, I know that you talk a lot about joy. What you write is midlife is when we outgrow our pursuit of happiness and start our practice of joy.
I like the word joy because, my company was called Joie de Vivre. And, the difference, J.D. Salinger said, the difference between happiness and joy is happiness is a solid and joy is a liquid. And so happiness is circumstantial. It's like the things that are happening to you. Joy is something coming from inside of you. Learning how in that chapter of the book, talking about joyously stepping off the treadmill is learning how to say, oh, I have been living somebody else's life. I've been, subscribing to my parents' definition of success. That's not mine. And that kind of autonomy and agency is really valuable. And it helps people to realize, oh, I have more choices. Which brings us to the next chapter, which
Yes.
once you have more choices, you have more time affluence potentially, because the editing process and getting off the treadmill process leads you to saying like, oh, time affluence. Rich is about money, being wealthy, maybe about time. And how could I have the time to become a beginner again? What is something from my childhood or earlier in my life that I was passionate about, but I have let go of? I'd like to bring back into my life, whether it's learning guitar or becoming a travel writer or being a mentor or whatever it is that sounds interesting.
And finally, it's the spiritual life, which we would love to talk about. And I've discovered my soul. Can you talk about what that means and why discovering our soul matters when we're here on earth?
The reality is that as we are getting older, we start to shed something. We shed, not completely, but we start to let go of the ego a little bit. And we realize that the world doesn't revolve around us and that the primary operating system in our life moves to something deeper and more meaningful in our life than just our surface ego. And that's when we start to feel more of a sense of awe in our life, because we actually, awe is a beautiful emotion.
And it's amazing. You're going to have a whole class on that, right?
Yeah, awe is an emotion and it's a state of being. And it's a beautiful one because it actually takes us out of the ghetto of the ego, allows us to see something bigger. So long story short is I am a big fan of exploring awe, and Dacher Keltner, the world's leading expert on awe, who's on our faculty. He's a UC Berkeley professor, started the Greater Good Science Center. He talks about the 8 pathways to awe. It's really interesting. That's the 11th of the 12th. And then the last one is about growing whole, which I sort of talked about
You
earlier.
did, yeah.
Yeah. And that's just like, how do you start to take all these polarities in your life and you sort of fuse them, alchemize them into something that is a singular whole person?
So your faculty, do they offer classes repeatedly? We saw like Mark Nepo. I mean, some of these people are just, all of your people are, but when you're talking about things like awe, that's pretty cutting edge right now,
Yeah, it is.
And then Mark Nepo, who's been such a great teacher for so long.
Yeah, he teaches twice a year with us, once in Baja, once in Santa Fe. Our pillar workshops, which are either navigating transitions, cultivating purpose, or owning wisdom. And those are taught exclusively by myself, my 2 co-founders, and our facilitators. But when we have guest faculty like Richard Rohr last week and Elizabeth Gilbert this fall,
Yeah.
when we have them, we bookend our curriculum at the start and at the end, but the core of the workshop is really the guest faculty member. And they're talking about something that is relevant to people in midlife and beyond, whether it's awe or creating magic with Elizabeth Gilbert or spirituality in the second half of life with Richard Rohr.
And from this book, what are some of the action items that you hope people take? Pretty much what we went through, each of the steps, or what are you hoping people get?
I would want people to recognize like, here's 2 or 3 of these that resonate with me. I'm going to really look at the exercises or the questions that Chip asks in the book, and I'm going to take those really seriously. So I think that would be helpful. I think finding a group of people who can be sort of your guides or your accountability partners on this is really helpful. So I would say that's really important. Think about MEA for an online course. We have online courses as well, which are for many people is the easiest way for them to access it. It's the cheapest way. Or consider coming to one of our 2 workshop campuses. We have financial aid available for some of our workshops, many of our workshops.
Can you lock into the alumni group before you're an alumni, or you got to do it and then get in?
You got to do it and then get it. Yeah.
Got to do the work and then
That
get
makes
in.
sense. That makes sense. It's amazing what you've built. Really incredible. I know Dora and I both want to come and attend and
we
be
do.
part of this. But this idea that you're rebranding, this idea that you're breathing life into something that we all have is just remarkable. And we're just thrilled to know you and thrilled to know about your work.
And we want everyone to read your #1 New York Times bestseller, Learning to Love Midlife. It's a wonderful book.
Chip, thank you so much.
God, this is such an honor. I really appreciate it. I love the energy of both of you.
Thank you for joining us on Health Gig. We loved having you with us. We hope you'll tune in again next week. In the meantime, be sure to like and subscribe to this podcast and follow us on healthgigpod.com. I'm Tricia.
And I'm Doro.
Be well.